All right, so thanks again for joining us for this introduction to the Washtenaw Equity Partnership report. We're going to kind of jump right in and share in general what some of the different findings are, what the recommendations are throughout the report, and then have some time to talk about what this specifically looks like and means for ICPJ. So first, just to start, the Washtenaw Equity Partnership was a collaboration between Washtenaw County partners aimed at creating a transparent, coordinated, and evidence-based community plan to address racial disparities across Washtenaw criminal legal systems. This included partners both who are both inside and outside of the system. So we had partners like the Public Defender's Office, the Trial Court, the Prosecutor's Office, Board of Commissioners, Citizens for Racial Equity in Washtenaw, nonprofit leaders, and about 100 people overall who participated in the different subcommittees and work groups for this project. It was supported by the Vera Institute for Justice, who helped facilitate us and did a lot of research as well. And it took about a little over a year for us to do that. We really wanted to make sure that we're focusing on how we achieve equitable outcomes, take evidence-based action, maintain accountability, work collaboratively, focus on innovation, and have thought and think about how we can have a thoughtful allocation of resources. We had ICPJ representation across almost all of the different subcommittees. And so that was really great. It was really easy for us to kind of stay up to date as things were in the process because of that, but it just shows kind of the wide interest and skill set of our network that we were able to add benefits across the different areas of work. What you'll see as we talk about, if you want to go to the next slide, when we think about these different areas that are the areas of work for the final report, these do not exactly correlate with the different subcommittees. So some of the things within the subcommittees are spread across these areas of focus, but this the final report is split into 5 different strategies. So we see the invest in community prevention and infrastructure, reducing initial system contact and restructuring custody and the court processes, restructuring in custody programming, release, reentry, and community support, supporting youth development, and then using data to ensure equity, measure outcomes, and achieve accountability. We and the supplemental materials detail interviews and focus groups of people impacted by the system, as well as some additional materials in terms of, maybe some implementation ideas and different things for folks, especially that want to go deeper into understanding how some of the different conclusions were made that the report put forward. And so we're going to start off jumping into this first section. As we go through these, you'll notice that some of the different recommendations are highlighted. And these will give you a sense of some of the areas where ICPJ plans to focus our campaigns. And so we'll come to those at the end, but you'll kind of see that as we go through in terms of some of the recommendations. And then also, again, just to recognize again that this is very abbreviated overview. This first strategy in and of itself has 21 recommendations within it, and each strategy has, probably about that within it. So we're not going to go over all of them. And so I definitely want folks to know that that there will be opportunities to kind of go deeper. And I'll be interested to see when we're not on sharing screen, kind of how many folks have already kind of been involved with looking into the report. So this first one is investing in community prevention and infrastructure. It aims to reduce contact with the criminal legal system through early interventions that improve people's stability. And so the way we're going to do this, Pollock will talk about the issues for each of the strategies, and then I will share the recommendations.
Yeah, so just to get started, within this first strategy, these are like an overview of the issues it aims to address, but going a little deeper, like employment, in terms of criminal background checks, when people are being considered for employment, it can be a big barrier in getting a job. Similarly with housing, public housing authorities can and have limited, prohibited, and excluded housing access based on both criminal convictions and where people get their income from. As for behavioral health services, so Washtenaw County was actually given more positive ratings than other Michigan counties in terms of its behavioral health services, but there is still data that shows like socioeconomic and health factors are correlated with poor mental health in certain areas, so it's still an area of focus. And then for law enforcement, racial disparities are clearly present in terms of arrests, psychological and physical effects that result from initial contact with law enforcement. I think you're muted, Des.
Thank you. So for this first one here, our recommendation is focused around employment opportunities. And so the recommendation is to expand ban the box policies countywide. Ban the box policies prohibit employers from asking about criminal history when making hiring decisions. And what we can see here in this chart is on the left, it's the before you ban the box, and the furthest left is when they have a criminal history. The blue bar is for Black applicants, the green bar is for white applicants. So you can see that when they have criminal history, where that's the lowest in terms of gaining employment. Next over is when they have no criminal history, and we see those differences there. And then all the way to the right is when you post banning the box. And so you can see that the opportunities for getting a callback raise in particular for Black applicants, but also we can see there is a slight increase for white applicants as well. The next one, the next area of recommendations is focused around housing. So we see that housing was a really large barrier for folks. And so we want to make sure, so the recommendation is to reduce barriers for people with criminal charges to access housing. So this looks like reducing look back periods, such as like the amount of time that you can look at the background check, or that the background check covers, as well as passing housing first as a priority across the county. And there's a number of different kinds of housing first practices. And really, as we'll see here in this chart, it's really about trying to have people house permanently first, as opposed to thinking about, really focusing in on shorter term stays, and really focusing on having fewer limitations on what a person needs, or what qualifies a person for housing. So removing a lot of those barriers so that folks can be housed. And then also prohibiting discrimination based on sources of income towards housing assistance through ordinances. So as an example, both the city of Ypsilanti and the city of Ann Arbor have source of income ordinances, which says that if a person has a voucher or other kinds of assistance, that counts towards their income. But one of the things that we've heard is that there's still a lot of barriers and ways that landlords kind of get around those ordinances in different ways. So we see here in this chart, a revolving door of prison contributes to homelessness. And so we can see, so this is looking at the number of people experiencing homelessness in 2008 per 10,000 population. The general public is at 21, incarcerated only once, it jumps up to 141, and then incarcerated more than once, 279. So you see with each incarceration, it makes it more likely that a person will experience homelessness. And then here we want to, this shows us how much formerly incarcerated people typically earn and how it's well below requirements for public housing assistance. And so again, this is really looking at why we need to make sure that the local ordinances are being followed and push back against landlords that put forth requirements that circumvent the source of income allowances, which could include adding a lot of different kinds of fees or fines or things that then tenants are being required to put forward, or how many months of rent, security deposit, things like that kind of add to what a person needs up front. I've also seen things where they're starting to ask around things around your credit, thinking about how much how much money you have saved and different things like that. So just different ways that folks are really looking to get around that. And then at the same time, we know that we need to expand housing that's available for people of lower incomes as well. And so even as we think about what the possibilities and opportunities are, we need to both make sure that people have access within the housing stock we have, and also to note where we need more housing stock. And we actually, thankfully, for housing advocates, would say that we are in a time of building right now. Both the city of Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor have several affordable housing developments that are in process now. And so I look forward to seeing how those help to add to addressing some of the shortage of housing that we see, and hope that we are able to keep this trend moving so we can actually meet the need that we actually have. And then the next set of recommendations is around law enforcement. And so within this area, the recommendation is to form unarmed civilian response teams for situations where police are not needed, and bar police from non-safety related traffic stops. As well as advocating for the decriminalization of drug possession for personal use. And this also includes paraphernalia. And at the same time, wanting to create an overdose prevention center in the county for safe use, and also as a place where people who use drugs are able to access resources in a different way. And then also to increase community involvement around camera surveillance and law enforcement process. presence. And in these charts, you can see here, let's start the one on the right. More people are arrested for drug possession than for any crime in the US. Its share as a percentage of total arrests is also increasing. And so we can see how this line is steadily going up. And then we also can see on the left, this is looking at the share of incidents in deaths with a person, whether they're perceived or confirmed to be armed or unarmed. And so just the bar that is the furthest to the right, we can see that that it's pretty almost equal between those who are perceived and confirmed to be armed, where death and serious injury, with those who were unarmed and not perceived to be armed. And so that just speaks to the importance of really minimizing contact and minimizing possibilities for armed conflict between police and the citizens of this space.
Okay, so moving on to the second strategy. This one is titled Reduce Initial System Contact, Restructure Custody and Court Processes. So this one focuses on how to reduce contact before trials even happen. So some of the issues that this aims to address is, so one, starting with pretrial detention. Pretrial detention is usually associated with worse outcomes for the next steps of a case, and the main cause of pretrial detention is overuse of money bail. And the racial disparities within the bail system are very clear. In 2017, the ACLU found that Black people were 8.55 times more likely than white people to be incarcerated as a result of not being able to pay bail. And for some more context, I'm just going to read some quotes from Washtenaw residents who had a direct experience with the legal system in Washtenaw County. So one resident said, "I was accused of assisting in a crime, which was petty thievery, and they set the bail at $1,000. I couldn't raise that. My mom at the time was in the hospital. She was having problems with her health. So we had spent a lot of time and a lot of resources in taking care of her. Since we had moved, we couldn't raise the amount, so I had to do time. I did the time, got out in 6 months." And another one said, "They gave me a bail of $250,000, and they knew that my mom was on welfare and I was homeless. They never lowered it. They never gave me a chance for a PR, which is a personal reconnaissance. And it was my first time with a big felony, with any type of felony." So it's a big issue when, monetary causes become the root of someone having to be detained. As for the second point, lack of alternatives, traditional courts and processes. So a common issue with court-mandated treatments is that they can have inconsistent effectiveness, and they can even further perpetuate criminalization of substance use. And many people choose jail over the option of specialty courts, which are an alternative to traditional punishment, which are aimed at connecting people charged with crimes to community-based treatments to try and address the underlying cause of criminal behavior. Basically just like another route to take in terms of punishment. But many people choose jail over this because of how difficult it is to comply with the requirements, pay the fees and costs while also staying employed. As for incomplete, sorry, no, I'm going to skip a little ahead. For probation and probation violations, the issue here is that they often entail a lot of monetary steps, so that you might have to pay for drugs, go to classes, etc., before you can get off of probation. But this one is it's an economic barrier, but two, it also just limits the ability for people to work, and it just can be a lot to handle overall and push people back away, from reentry success.
And so some recommendations are to expand the type of criminal cases that are eligible for restorative justice initiatives, specifically in cases without a specific or identifiable victim. And for folks who don't know, restorative justice is an approach to where a victim, offender, and any other individuals affected by the crime can participate together in a resolution of matters resulting from the crime. Usually this is a facilitated process. And we have a wonderful resource here in Washtenaw County with the Dispute Resolution Center, for example, that does a lot of this work and has worked with the prosecutor's office to help support driving more cases into restorative processes. And it also is about kind of just changing our mindset in terms of what is possible and what ways that restorative justice can actually support transforming our justice system. We also, another recommendation is to eliminate barriers for specialty court programs, to allow individuals with violent activity charges to participate, to eliminate the fee requirements for program completions, to address why Black people have fewer referrals for such programs, and to implement a community advisory committee with people of color representation. Some other things just to note that also are within recommendations within this strategy is to really investigate disproportionalities in incomes, and outcomes. One such thing is to change, and here in Washtenaw County, we have a one judge for life rule for criminal cases. And recommendation is to change that so that it's a more random order to be in line and to be consistent with the Michigan Supreme Court rules. And so there's a number of things in here that we can do.
So moving on to the third strategy, titled Restructure and Custody Programming, Release, Reentry, and Community Support. So this one looks at how to combat the harms of incarceration and how to ensure stability during reentry to society. So the main issues that this strategy aims to address is, so one is like with the actual conditions of jails and prisons. So conditions refers to its physical infrastructure, its access to programs and services for like housing and employment. And it's even like applies to limits on contact with friends and family that inmates are given. And so what happens is often these conditions, they don't prepare people for reentry, and they can also make successful reentry much harder. And then another issue is with defaults in parole. So since there's no process for creating a local response guide, responses to violations are usually determined by individual parole officers based on the Michigan Department of Corrections guideline, which is MDOC. And we'd like to note that MDOC did not provide information, did not answer information requests, which about like data on prison populations, conditions and programs, parole and probation numbers, and reentry programs. I think you're muted again, Dan.
I'm sorry, I keep muting when I'm not talking. Okay, so recommendations here are to provide those incarcerated with access to community-based programs, including case management, peer support, and other services. Also to reduce barriers for incarcerated people and to maintain contact with their friends and family alongside efforts to assist people in maintaining contact. And I think just in terms of thinking about this, it's important to note that studies show that simply maintaining contact is strongly associated with better reentry outcomes. But that is at odds with actually what is happening, because friends and family can only be added to a list every 6 months, and then they have to apply and wait to be approved. And then they have limited visiting days and hours, plus locations of our correctional the different prisons across the state are really on the outskirts of the state. And so because of that, that adds a lot of transportation time for people. And then on top of that, the folks who are incarcerated can lose their privileges, their so-called privileges for visitation due to behavioral infractions. And so there's a lot of barriers there. And then, and even in terms of thinking about email and phone, there's a lot of restrictions, and the cost is also high. So that becomes really prohibitive. And so there are a lot of barriers that can be changed, and a lot of those things actually don't take a cost. So that's one of the things I like about some of these recommendations, and that is that really there are changes in policy and the ways that we do things, not only things that have a cost associated with them. And this is a change that really could go really far in terms of adding to success, both in terms of maintaining our focus of a person's humanity, even as they are incarcerated, as well as helping them to better be able to reconnect. Because what we know is that a lot of times folks are actually relying on their friends and family on the outside to help them with getting resource, to help them to do applications, to help figure out things that they might need or different resources. And that's not able to happen when they can't even be in touch to get information. So so this is a really big area where there could be some big change. Another recommendation is actually to fund general economic subsidies to support reentry, housing, and transportation for residents returning from incarceration. And so you know, a lot of times folks say, oh, don't just throw money at it. But this is a situation where we're like, yes, throw some more money at it. Help people come be able to actually enter and have some resources as they're going through. And this is an area where as we'll talk about a little bit later, the work that ICPJ is doing, focusing around participatory budgeting, could be a source of support in terms of thinking about funding to try to pilot some of these things, or to move resources from more punitive uses into something like this that can be restoring for our communities. And then also within recommendations in this area is thinking about how we further clean slate and record expungement efforts. And ways to help support that is to hire additional paid attorneys and expand pro bono involvement to enable more people to apply for record sealing and expungements, and to recognize that this is when we think about expungements, this is really a harm reduction kind of approach, because obviously even if our society was held true to say, oh, you served your time and now you're back and now you have the full, access to resources that everyone else has, we wouldn't need this as bad. But what we know is that that's not happening, and actually their criminal records are still a barrier for employment and housing and other resources. And so that lifts up the importance for doing expungement work. And I know too, ICPJ has been able to work in collaboration with some of our partners here in the county to host an expungement fair too, so that then a person just has to come to one spot and has all the people to help them work through the process. Because one of the other things that the evidence shows is that a lot of people might start those applications, but they're not actually finishing them. And so a lot of folks who could have their records expunged don't actually make it all the way through the process.
All right, so moving on to strategy 4. So this one is youth development based, and it focuses on how to reduce juvenile contact specifically with the justice system through different interventions. So one of the issues in this matter is the racial disparities in youth contact with the justice system. So Black youth make up only 17% of Washtenaw County population of 10 to 16-year-olds, but they make up the majority of incidents of arrests, referrals to juvenile court, detention, and other types of juvenile justice involvement. Further, in the referral stage, Black youth make up 62.7% of cases that are referred to the juvenile justice system, but they only make up 13.6% of the county population in the same range, which is 10 to 17-year-olds. So then another issue has to do with status offenses. So, which are status offenses are actions that wouldn't be legal if the minor were an adult, but are because they are minors. So like examples are like skipping school, missing curfew, or ungovernable behavior. And these offenses push over 100,000 juveniles per year into the justice system, which is a hefty amount. And lastly, another big issue is the lack of clear information that's available about system involvement, guilty pleas, and restitution. So an example of this is how people have cited being unsure about whether certain programs require a guilty plea, and others have said retrospectively that they regretted taking guilty pleas because they didn't know that in the moment that a criminal record would have longer term implications for their options in the future.
So recommendations are to eradicate status offenses. And I know this is huge. I remember just in general in conversations with young people where I've had folks tell me, and this is across the county in Ann Arbor, as well as in Ypsilanti and in the township too, where young people have said things like, oh, if there's just a group of us, like we know the police is going to come over and say something to us. And that's just them like hanging out, like just out and about at the, at the bus depots or anything like that. And so there's a lot of targeting of young people that happens. And so that's something that, we could, again, do in partnership to address contact with the system. We can implement more juvenile diversion using the Michigan Task Force on Juvenile Justice Recommendations. And so this is, again, a statewide study and effort that has come out that names some really strong recommendations. And we can expand partnerships and have an oversight mechanism to help support those diversion efforts. Reduce use of residential placement, which is facilities that incarcerate or detain juveniles. And this is important both in terms of thinking about developmentally appropriateness, where we currently see folks being separated from their families, when really what they need is more support within a community and their family spaces, as well as what happens when everyone is kind of put together in a space and how that actually starts to build different kinds of contacts as well, that then enhance different kinds of behaviors when the young people are back out in public too. And so again, it just doesn't seem to make sense. And so we want to reduce those uses. And then also expanding school approaches to disciplinary issues. And so this looks like strengthening community and school-based substance use, harm reduction, and mental health treatment programs, as well as eliminating or reducing school suspensions and expulsions as widely as possible. And there's some breakdown saying from K to 5 to eliminate expulsions, suspensions and expulsions completely, and then for older students to do it as often and as much as possible. And then we can just see in this next slide here, what we are looking at when we're thinking about a chance of a young person being charged with another crime. So if after entering the justice system, we see 20 to 30% chance. post-arrest diversion, we see that drop to 11 to 15%, and pre-arrest diversion, we see that at 5 to 10%. And some of these things can also be done in collaboration with law enforcement, so that, as an example, instead of giving a young person a ticket, they can give a warning instead, right? And so in those ways, really completely remove the young person from being impacted in the system.
All right, so now moving on to our last strategy. This one is very data focused. It looks at data and how to improve its consistency, comprehensiveness, use, and transparency across the criminal legal system. So the reason why it's so important is that inconsistent data collection and lack of data analysis can often be big roadblocks towards addressing racial disparities in criminal legal systems. And so the Washtenaw Equity Partnership's mapping of criminal justice data collection in Washtenaw found inconsistent data collection and analysis practices within the county and the local criminal legal system entities, and also web-based obstacles in obtaining data from local and state public institutions, including the police, county jail, courts, and the Michigan Department of Corrections. So in general, like not being able to have data and not having it consistently used can be, it might not seem like a lot, but it is a big problem.
And just to note, so I'll talk about these two recommendations, which kind of encompass actually multiple recommendations. But I also want to say, even though we're coming to the end and I only have these two, this area actually has a lot more recommendations, and they actually look at data broken down by different subset, like the different groups. And so really these different, the 4 different strategies we covered, they have some specific data pieces tied to each of those different areas. But just so for us to keep in mind, so develop a cross-system criminal justice data warehouse and a public dashboard to communicate what is data from that warehouse. And Washtenaw Equity Partnership created a checklist for building and maintaining a data warehouse that was based on learnings from other places, such as Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, and Multnomah County, Oregon, as well as a checklist for the Bureau of Justice Assistance at the U.S. Department of Justice. And so some very clear details and for the county to follow in terms of creating this warehouse. And also a recommendation to do further research in terms of a number of areas, including cultural responsivity of our services, community violence intervention programs and their impact, 911 calls, disciplinary action within schools, and much more. As well as thinking about the different, so also doing studies around different racial disparity analysis that we might see in some of the different areas like the PSI process or parole or things of that sort. Oh, wow. This is just flying by, y'all. I can't believe it that we're already here. So for ICPJ, there's so much that we can do with all of this information. And part of what we like to do is also flow where the energy is within our network. And so we're going to get ready to shift into that piece now. But we're going to share a few ideas of campaigns that are aligned with work that we have been doing and that we want to do with others. So this is a series of 5. So one thing that we are interested in supporting, and then I know this is something that the bridge team, which we'll talk about in a second, is also interested in seeing put forward, is spreading driving equality ordinance across the county, so the different municipalities, in order to reduce the types of traffic stops that law enforcement make. And so Ann Arbor has passed one of these kinds of ordinances, and we have seen some of these ordinances passed in other parts of the country as well. But again, this gets at reducing that first contact. And or thinking about how we shift what that first contact looks like. And so instead of giving people tickets, giving them access to resources, to be able to do things like, we have pullover prevention clinics here. And so when someone has a broken taillight, we actually have a resource that we could provide to people so that they can get those taillights fixed. The second, excuse me. The second area is mobilizing for unarmed response teams and working to establish and fund those in Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor. And so just to say that ICPJ was part of the design team for care-based safety. And so we very much support what care-based safety has been putting forward and the work that they've been doing, and support their pilot that they're launching in the Ypsilanti area. And as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of folks are at the Ann Arbor City Council meeting tonight, in part to try to advocate for care-based safety. And so we send positive vibes to all the folks there in that space. And then next we have a campaign for participatory budgeting to allocate funds as needed. When we're in a situation at the county level where we know 60 to 70% of the county's shared resources are going to more punitive resources, we can imagine what is possible when those resources are shared differently. And so we would love, although it may not be possible, but we would love if we actually could have participatory budgeting teams that would focus both in the city of Ypsilanti, the city of Ann Arbor, as well as at the county level, as the municipalities are in process of going through their budgeting processes before June. And then the county will be also going through its process that will, they'll be going through their budgeting process in the fall. And then next we have exploring sources of income discrimination. So looking at what do landlords actually require that goes against sources of income ordinances, and then to advocate for accountability and enforcement. And so this could look like collecting stories from people, looking at landlord postings, and identifying gaps in enforcement. And then, also a campaign for overdose prevention center and safe use sites. And this is in part tied with a need to reduce stigma around behavioral health and people who use drugs overall, but then also to think about the real needs that people have. And again, when thinking about harm reduction and safety first, thinking about having resources so people can actually test the drugs that they might be using for safety, as there's a lot more contamination of the drugs that is driving overdose crisis here. And so, for instance, if you had a safe use site, then you can have very strong and testing testing units so that you can not only figure out whether your supply is clean, you can actually get a sense of what percentage of different kinds of things are in your supply. And you can have people who are trained to be able to say, you know, if you use this, this can kill you, by understanding what's actually in the supply. And then also you can also have other kinds of resources that can help, that could help to actually, you know, move people into recovery as well. And so this is something that, you know, we know there's interest in. And I see a question about if we have buy-in from police for safe use sites. And so that's not yet happened. I would say that a lot of these things that we can't say that we have buy-in from the police for any of these recommendations overall, but that doesn't mean that that's not possible. We do know that, as an example, our county prosecutor has put forward some support for something like this as well. And so it's really trying to figure out some of those details, and also in the conversations is thinking about like where it could be. And so depending on who owns a space, that there's some different concerns that come forward. And so there's some people who have been doing work and looking at this both at the state level and across the country, looking at safe use sites and the things that we can learn from them from in different places. But there's still work to do in terms of what that would look like here in Washtenaw County. I'm going to put in a link here for folks to fill out that will take you, really, it's just it's a short form where people can identify if there's one of these areas that speak to you, where you would have interest in gathering with us in order to do some work. And so we'll come back to that, but I wanted to put this in here for folks to start looking into as well. And then next, just to say again, so we want to share. So when the Washtenaw Equity Partnership was sunset earlier in the spring of 2023. Oh, okay. I'll look at the thing. You should be able to see this form, but I will make sure to open it up. Okay. So when we sunset in the spring, we authorized a group called the Bridge Team to carry forward our work. And the Bridge Team was situated in order to take the report and to really focus in on implementation. What would it look like? What is possible? How do we think about implementation of the work as well as costs, and like how might we prioritize what we do on a timeline and things of that sort. And so that team is going to be doing their first community meeting on February 2nd from 9 to noon at the Morris Lawrence building of Washtenaw Community College. And so I also will put the link to that in the chat. We definitely encourage folks to go to that. As we see, like, this was like such a quick overview, and it still took like almost an hour for how quick it was. And so we know that we'll be diving in more deeply, and folks will be able to get a lot more context and connect with others who are also interested in working in these areas. And so I'll put the link for the registration here too. And And we can go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and open access to the form right quick, but we can stop sharing screen so we can have some quick conversation.
I'm sorry, I had jumped on late. My name is Keisha Johnson. How you guys doing? And I wanted to know, like, who all helped push the equality ordinance? Like who helped wrote, like who helped pushed it, what organizations, what people, and then who helped write it?
Yeah, so I know that I don't know all of the answers to that, but I do know that Council Member Cynthia Harrison was one of the primary authors for the one that's in Ann Arbor. And she is a member of the bridge team, and and so I know that that's part of why that is one of the areas that they are interested in, for sure.
And one more thing, I did see that, like, I believe I read an email that kind of like, an article. So thank you for giving me that grounding too, of like who was pushing it in Ann Arbor. So how was it pushed in IFC?
Yeah, so I can tell you. So right now, there is somebody actually. So I'll just do this a really quick piece where in the city of Ypsilanti, we have somebody. So we have one person whose name is Korn, who actually helped to steward a decriminalization for plant medicines, which the city of Ypsilanti just passed this Tuesday. And that came forward because some city council members hosted a solutionary circle, and Korn and others attended that, and they talked both about decriminalizing plant-based medicines as well as pretext stops and dealing with traffic stops. And so the first thing that they worked on, that has now been passed, and now they're working through the Police Advisory Commission to actually work on writing and passing passing something similar in the city. And so the commission is planning on working to write it, and then it would come to city council to pass from there. And so they're working with the police chief and others on that.
Okay, so you're saying that driving equality ordinance could like be broadened and more deepened? It's in a way.
Yeah, so I think it's more of trying to pass it and implement it in the different municipalities. And I see Marianne, given the context of that, Kevin Karpiak, who is with EMU SMART. Maybe Marianne, you'll remember exactly what the acronym SMART is. That he and his group, they did a traffic stop report, and so that was used as part of the grounding for this. So Marianne, I'll go ahead and kick it to you. I see your hand is raised.
I actually had a different question, but yeah, Kevin Karpiak's a professor, and he got traffic stop data, I think, from the AAPD, and that analysis came out last year. And that's what kind of launched this whole idea that I think he worked with Cynthia or council person Cynthia Harrison on that. But I had another question, if we can move to that, or is there a follow-up to that?
No, you go right ahead.
So my question is on pre-arrest diversion. You Des, you said that it would be, law enforcement's going to have to be involved with that, because that's really the point where we don't even want the child to touch the system. And is that a place for us to start advocating in terms of the sheriff's race, in terms of interviewing the new Ann Arbor police chief? Does IPSI are they looking for a police chief? I can't remember where things stood with that, but is that a place where we could start advocating, hey, how, basically question those candidates?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Marianne. So in the city of Ypsilanti, there is, we do have a police chief who's fairly new. He's been there for less than a year so far. And so I think still a lot of opportunity for folks to, connect with him and to encourage exactly what you're suggesting. And obviously at the sheriff's level, we have a big election this year. We're in election year, y'all. Did you know? And so I think that is, I think that is definitely something in an area where it would make sense to make some of those requests and those questions. And I think the other thing, which this is not this isn't in the report either, but when in the report it talks about things like developmentally appropriate practices, but one of the things that we know too, even when looking at the data, that when there's a pretty sizable proportion of contact stops with folks who are youth, and yet kind of developmentally appropriate practices are not part of training even for officers and law enforcement. And so just in terms of thinking about questions at that level, I think that's another area too to push for some reform.
I just wait one more note on the juvenile stuff, and I hate saying the word juvenile because that sounds like they're criminals. Youth stuff, the youth development, the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County, and you and I talked about this, Desiree, earlier, that they have a criminal justice advocacy unit or section, and they're working on juvenile justice issues, mainly the state task force, but they might be a partner on any youth justice work that we do.
Yeah, and what you'll see is in the as we're going through the recommendations, you'll note that there aren't any recommendations that we put forward in ICPJ that were specifically focused at the youth area. But that's primarily because we know that there's other partners who are very focused. And so we're happy to be support, but really looking to some partners, like as you're suggesting, who are much better situated to actually address some of those needs. Great. I love how y'all jumped in. So yeah, are there other kind of thoughts that folks have just from considering what we've shared tonight? I'm also interested to hear, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording actually too.